Okay, what's going on? My name is Mang, and welcome back to Roll Mangging for our Call of Cthulhu campaign. Oh boy, what a session this was. As stated at the end of the session, they didn't really get much done. I wouldn't go so far as saying the whole session was worthless, because I, for one, had a hell of a lot of fun running it, but as far as actual information, not a tremendous amount. But still, it was good fun. Alright, so when we left off, when we left off episode 1, Roy was dead, and let's see here, let's look at my notes. Yeah, Roy was dead at the Juju house. He jumped down the trapdoor after Silas. The others, except for Professor Skinner, saw zombies, and they tried fighting them, but they eventually just ran out of there. They dumped the other cultist bodies down the chute, along with Roy's and Silas Naquan's, and they ran out of there. And they took some rest days. You know, they went to the hospital, stuff like that. The dentist bought a revolver. Pretty much not anything really exciting. And so, in between that, which was like a month ago, we had some character change-ups, because I said, you know, I gave a little bit more information about what was going on. And so they decided, most of them decided they wanted, you know, more suitable characters. And so we left. Gone were Walter Pratt, Marcus, Gerald, and they were replaced by Alfred, Simon, Neil, Charlie, and we introduced Mafume. And okay. Right. So today's session started on January 20th, 1925, which was a Tuesday. And so I started the session with Professor Anthony Skinner. And I basically said, you find yourself in a large room surrounded by nude men and women. And they are all wearing the exact same headdress that you recognize as belonging to the cultists that you saw at the hotel room. And they are all just dancing around you, chanting in an unknown language. And one man steps forward and begins chanting in a different tongue. It sounds very sinister, and he starts quiet, but he gets louder and louder and louder. And they bring in 3, like, bound and gagged men. One of them you recognize as your dentist friend. And they bring them towards you. And you begin chanting as well in the same tongue. The words just pouring out of your lips. And you notice that you begin to get very hungry and hungry. And they bring these men closer to you as your mouth opens wider and wider. And you lean forward and you start to devour these men. And you feel that they become one with you. And then you wake up. And then I had him roll sanity loss. And he wasn't really happy with that, because it's very tough for Anthony Skinner to make a sanity check. He's quite unhinged at this point. And so that was yeah, I gotta decide what I mention here and what I mention in Secrets of Roll Mangging. I think I'll just get the facts out here, and we'll talk about all the implications in Secrets of Roll Mangging. Although people that watch Secrets of Roll Mangging, they already know what's going on. I guess, okay. That should have bothered him more than just, oh, that was interesting, and a sanity check. That should have bothered him quite a bit. First of all, the fact that he had a nightmare about him devouring his friend. And secondly, why he had that nightmare. Because Anthony Skinner never saw that room. He never went down there. Why is he dreaming about it? I'm not sure if Ziggy actually questioned this or not, but it's something to think about. Okay. And so then he calls his professor friend down in Pennsylvania, Professor Thorogood Waxman, professor of anthropology. And he basically tells him that he's launching this kind of research expedition, or I don't think he used expedition, research project in New York. And he could use some assistance, you know. And so Professor Thorogood, of course, agrees, and he'll call up some people, and he'll send them up to his place, and blah, blah, blah. All well and good. That was all planned. And so then, he's then paid a visit by a police detective, who introduces himself as Lieutenant Martin Poole. And Lieutenant Martin Poole sits down, drinks some coffee with him. And the lieutenant tells him that, you know, Roy mentioned his name, and, you know, he made that dubious statement at the crime scene of Mr. Jackson Elias. And so the lieutenant has been trying to track down Roy to get some questions answered, you know. See if he knows anything, see if this Roy character knows anything. And he can't seem to get a hold of him. He's not at his residence, and he hasn't shown up to work in a couple days. And so he talks to some of his co-workers at the public library, and they mention that he would hang out occasionally with some people. And one of them was a Yankees player who didn't comment much. He tried to talk to him, he didn't comment much. One of them was a dentist at a local dentistry who also hasn't shown up in a couple days. And I thought that, again, I don't know what's going through Ziggy's head, but, you know, when he heard that the dentist hasn't shown up to work in a couple days, that should get you thinking. Like, that, I should have made another sanity check. If I was really cruel, I would have. But the fact that you just had a nightmare about you devouring this guy, and then this cop tells you that he's missing, yeah, that's pretty effed up. Okay, and then he says the Wall Street banker, he paid an unexpected visit to him and found something unfortunate. Apparently the banker moonlighted as a serial killer and was constructing some sort of murder room in his house. Huh. And so out of a group of 5 men, 2 are missing, 1 is a serial killer, 1 is a Yankee player. So that pretty much leaves his only source of information as the professor. And so the professor didn't give up that much information to the cops. Basically said that he was helping Roy with an investigation, private investigation into the death of his friend Jackson. And they were supposed to follow up, you know, meet again, and he hasn't heard from him in the last couple of days. And so he tries to roll his persuade. He I think he critically fumbles or something. He did something really bad. And I could have just said, "You're under arrest now," but no. It's got to be more subtle than that. And so the detective pretty much just says, he gives him like a stern look, and then he's like, he pulls out his card. He's like, "Well, if you find anything out, you let me know." And basically the cop was just, he didn't really believe him, but what is he really gonna do, you know? He is a noted professor, so, you know, he's definitely on a list somewhere now. But yeah, okay. And so then he pretty much, the professor goes out. He takes a drive to the Juju house. And, like, just from the street, he tries to look over and see if anything's strange about the Juju house. And all he really noticed was that, you know, the sign just said closed. You know, he didn't really notice anything going on over there. And he drove back home. And there were a couple spot hidden rolls involved. made him feel kind of paranoid. And so when he got back home, he stood on his front lawn just smoking his pipe, just kind of looking around. And so I gave him another spot hidden roll, and he noticed one person that was kind of walking by glanced maybe a little bit too long at him for him to feel comfortable, you know? And then, you know, as soon as, you know, the professor kind of noticed him, he's just like, you know, what I didn't, you know. And so then he went back into his house, and he slept with his gun in hand. And so during the night, I had him roll a listen. He rolled a critical fail. He rolled a 100. So he did not hear a damn thing. And he got up in the morning feeling nice and refreshed, no nightmares, nothing. He's yawning and stretching, and then he looks over, and on his wall, hanging there, he sees one of the headdresses of the cultists, just like he saw in his nightmare. Aha! Again, you know, if in real life that shit happened to you, you'd be shitting yourself, man. You would move out of that house so damn quickly. Like, I don't know, man. But it is, you know, it's called Cthulhu, so whatever. Just roll with it. And so he picks it up, and, you know, it's just made out of kind of cheap materials, but it's just a little headdress, and it's got a long red tassel sticking out of it. Okay, there it is. And he looked around his house. It all seemed pretty secure, so... Huh. And then his phone rings. Shits himself. And he picks it up and he says, "Oh, is this Professor Skinner?" Aha. And the call is from Mr. Jonah Kensington, who they met, or the professor met, at the funeral of Jackson Elias. Jonah put the funeral together. He was a very close friend of Jackson. And his publishing house, his publishing company, Prospero House, they published all of Jackson Elias's books. So they're kind of into that. They're not into the occult necessarily, but they're into kind of the interesting stuff. And so Jonah definitely knew Jackson pretty well. And so Roy told him that they were investigating this murder. They wanted to get to the bottom of this, you know? And so that interested Jonah very much because he wants to find out who did that. He wants to get to the bottom of this. And so he tried to get a hold of Roy, but he doesn't appear to be answering his phone. So he recalled meeting a Professor Skinner at the funeral, and he got his number, and so he called him up. And he basically, Professor Skinner took a hold of the conversation very quickly and said, I don't want to talk about this over the phone. I think we need to meet in person. And Jonah's just like, oh, absolutely. Well, if you can come down to the Prospero House, we can talk there. He says, I'll be there. I'm leaving now. And so they leave. He leaves, and he heads straight to Prospero House. And he goes inside. He goes up to the 3rd floor. And he sits down with Jonah Kensington. And this conversation was a little bit lengthy. They basically discussed everything that... not everything, I guess, that the professor knew. But they discussed going to the Juju house, that misfortune happened there. Roy is dead. And he doesn't really know that much about what's going on. You know, dark things are brewing. And so Jonah offered his full support. And he talked a little bit about Jackson and what he's been doing, in the recent months. And he got a letter from him in August that basically said he believed the members of the Carlisle expedition were still alive. This is big news. And Jonah's like, if he had really discovered something about and made this public, he'd be world famous, And the cops think that, this was a cult murder that killed him, and I tend to agree because Jackson was very interested in cults. That's kind of what he was about. And so if some cult was indeed responsible for the Carlisle massacre, or the farce, I guess, of a Carlisle massacre, the fact that Jackson uncovered some information, you know, they could easily put 2 and 2 together. He's murdered, case closed. But case is not closed, is it? And, yeah. So he told, he read him the letter, you know, about the Carlisle expedition. He said that, you know, he had received notes from him from Nairobi and from London. They were increasingly paranoid and erratic, and it really made him feel concerned for his friend, that not all was right with him, you know. And so he arrived in, you know, New York just like a week or so ago, a little more than a week ago, and then, boom, murdered. And so Jonah suggests to the professor that perhaps it may be worth it to do some more research on the Carlisle expedition, as that seems to be the center of, you know, why Jackson was murdered. It wasn't some random killing. And so that could be the key to what, you know, gets us to the bottom of this. And he's also suggested talking to an Erica Carlisle, Roger Carlisle's sister, who Roger Carlisle was the head of the Carlisle expedition. And after they went missing, Erica went to Nairobi to try and track them down, and she eventually found the massacre. And so she lives just outside of New York at the Carlisle mansion. And so it could be worth it to speak with her. And, well, Professor Skinner basically heeded none of that advice. Not a bit. So that's interesting. And so he left Jonah Kensington. Jonah also offered, if they do go abroad at some point, you know, to Nairobi or perhaps to London, where Jackson last came from, he was willing to fully finance their trip, as he does want to get to the bottom of this. He thinks this is a big deal. And, you know, if they happen to uncover what happened to the Carlisle expedition, that's huge money for all of them, so he might get his money back. But more than anything, he cares that his friend Jackson, who was a great human being, you know, was murdered. Okay, so the rest of the group, the other 5, they arrive in New York. They had their deadlight experience. And, yeah. Well, that was what episode 1.5 was about, so that was all that. They were a little worse for the wear. They looked a little haggard. And so they all go to the professor's house. And so the professor, he's kind of paranoid. He's, you know, somebody broke into his house, left a headdress. He feels like people are following him. He's having nightmares. He's just sitting in his house, kind of like smoking a pipe. And suddenly 2 black cars pull up in front of his house. And a bunch of men get out. Oh, God. And so he gets his gun. He puts on the headdress. I don't know why. And he goes to the front door when they knock. And he's got his gun in hand. He's like, "What do you want from me?" And so Charlie Chalk, the private eye, that was his name. I couldn't remember. Charlie Chalk. How could I forget? Charlie Chalk's like, "Whoa, man. We don't want any trouble. We were sent here to help you." And so eventually they defuse the situation. None of them could remember the Thorogood Waxman's name, but eventually they figured it out. And so he invited them in. And he filled them in. He filled them in on not everything that they needed to know, but most of it. That there's definitely some cult angle here. They're going to be going to this place in Harlem called the Juju House. There are some perhaps supernatural entities in the basement of that place. I think zombies eventually got thrown around. I don't know how widespread that word is in 25, you know. If you just mentioned, well, it's a zombie, would somebody be like, "Oh, okay," because it's 1925. Like, that's not a big... Animated dead, I think you might understand, but I'm not the kind of DM that, you know, shit picks on stuff like that. If you want to say zombies just so we can understand what we're talking about, fine. You know, if the players really don't want to roleplay to the point where they, you know, they're saying stuff like animated dead and things like that, then whatever, you know, that's up to them. And so he fills them in. And there may have been some slight metagaming. I'm not sure. The professor mentioned to the rest of them that bullets don't really work on them. I'm not sure where he got that idea. I guess one of the other guys may have mentioned it to him, but I'm trying to remember how many of... Did they really shoot them? I know they threw knives. I know the Yankee player threw some knives at them. But I really don't know how many shots they fired and told the professor that bullets don't work on him. I guess, I don't know. Again, I don't know if that's shit-picking or me just trying to clamp down on metagame. I don't know. I guess it doesn't really matter. But, yeah, they got that idea in their head, and so they all went to the pawn shop, which has everything, I guess. They just bought a bunch of shit. And I'm like, yeah, sure, whatever. You know, if they want to buy rope and gloves and a rake and alcohol and shit like that, I'm like, yeah, whatever, because it doesn't matter. Again, their lives are in my fingertips at any moment. At any moment, I could just be like, yeah, they're pretty much dead. So let them be as prepared as they want to be. I encourage it, man. You know, in the end, it doesn't really matter, because in the end, it's more about being smart than having a bunch of shit on hand. And them going straight to the Juju house was, well, not that smart. That's basically, like, the professor he was kind of the head of this whole group, and he's like, we have to go to the Juju house. Time is of the essence, because he's very paranoid, and so he feels like if they clear out the Juju house, whatever's in it, all their problems will be solved. And so I think a couple of members of the group offered some alternatives, you know, doing research, knowledge is power. But the professor was firm. He's, no, we have to crush this opposition at the Juju house. And so they all agreed. They all did their pawn shop thing, and they all went to the Juju house. And a bit lapse in judgment, but perhaps Ziggy was really role-playing there, you know. He has a loose hold on reality at this point. You know, his sanity is dwindling, he's having nightmares, he's very paranoid. Sure, maybe he does think going to the Juju house and wiping it out will solve all his problems. I don't know how smart it is for everybody to agree with him, but I guess for the sake of moving things along, sure. And so, I think it's just funny that they go to the Juju house, like, almost right away in session 1. Like, they did not do much else. They got to the Juju house, shit went down, they run, they get out of there, people died. Start of session 2, they're just like, we have to get to the Juju house, and I'm like, oh god. Okay, so they get in front of the Juju house, or, you know, on the street, and there's a cigar shop nearby. So they go in, Alfred and Charlie, and Alfred talks to this guy, tries to get some information out of him. You know, basically says he's a friend of Silas. The shop closed down a few days ago. He's not sure why. He's wondering where Silas is. He doesn't know much. And so, that's pretty much it. He didn't get much information out of him, so they left the cigar shop. And they all go over to the front of the Juju house. And they pass by a couple of winos in the courtyard. And Charlie Chalk didn't know what a wino was. I don't know if that's really an obscure word. It's written in the campaign as winos. And so I said, you know, like they got a brown paper bag, you know, they're just lounging around. You still didn't get it, so I'm like, you know, an alcoholic, a bum, a hobo, a wino, I don't know. Okay, so yeah, there's a couple winos, and I think, again, Alfred tried talking to one of them, and all he was just, he like offered him $5 or something, and he just mumbled out like, it closed, gunshots a few nights ago. And that's pretty much it. And sure enough, you know, a few nights ago there were gunshots, and now it's closed. And there you go. And so they eventually, the door is locked, so they're sick of this shit. They need to get to the bottom of this. So they bust out a crowbar, and they bust open the front door. And the trap door is there, it's closed, the rug's over it, just like they left it. So they yank the rug off, they open the trap door, and it's just darkness down there. And so all four, well, all of them except for Neil and Simon go down the ladder. And they get to the bottom, and they notice a blood stain there. But no bodies. Somebody was here. And Neil and Simon, they're up there keeping watch. You know, just in case any shit goes down. I figured they would do something like that. They weren't completely dumb, and that's always good. If they were completely dumb, you know, it just, I can't not screw you guys over. I have to do it. So when you're not completely dumb, you know, that gives me room to just be like, hey, all right, they weren't dumb. So good. Keeping people watch was a good idea. All right. And so, yeah. So they're just up there. They're keeping watch. The rest of the group is down at the bottom of the ladder. And at the end of the hallway down there, they see the iron door. And so they go up to it. And none of them have been down there. Anthony never went down there. You know, Professor Skinner never went down there. So he has no idea what to really expect. All he knows is there's bad things down here. Bad entities. Zombies. Whatever. He doesn't know where they are. He doesn't know the layout or anything like that. So they see this iron door. And they all stack up on it. And they open it up. And the room is just completely dark. I don't know if it was dark last time. You forget about things like that. I guess because I'm still kind of a newbie. I forget the importance of having dark rooms. Which is important. Because there's no light down there. Not an ounce. So, it's completely dark. They're flashing their lights around. They see a bunch of drums lined up along the walls. They see like a big, huge stone block connected to a winch and pulley. And at the far end of the room, they see like a big curtain. And so they all go into the room. And they check out the winch and pulley. You know, they see that it's just connected to this huge stone block that's perfectly flush with the ground. And they're just kind of looking around, and then they're like, well, what's behind that curtain? What's behind? Well, we should go check that curtain out. And so Charlie Chalk busts out his rake that he bought from the pawn shop, and he's inching towards the curtain with the rake, and eventually he like prods it with it. And so just as he does that, upstairs, the two of them notice that at the far end of the alley, on the street, a car just pulled up with the letters NYPD written on the side of it. And that's where we broke for dinner, which I thought was a really good spot, where they just kind of chew on what is about to happen to them. And so when we came back, Charlie's rake like caught on the curtain and yanked it down. And so after the curtain came down, there stood 5 humanoids. And as they turned to look at them, you know, their foreheads had the ruin inscribed on it. Blood was, their eyes were gone, their intestines dragging out. Their skin was this, you know, pale green color. They're like dragging their legs behind them as they shamble towards them, and horrible. So sanity losses all around. And Professor Skinner's sanity loss was even worse. Because one of them was Roy. Roy the zombie. And so I was actually a little nicer than the campaign suggested I be. It suggested 1d8 plus 1d4 if you fail. I did 1d10. So he lost 8 sanity, which is a huge blow. And he went indefinitely insane. Which... that you go indefinitely insane when you lose 1/5 of your current sanity points in one check, which he did. He only had like 20. And this was kind of a bad point for Ziggy. Not the sanity loss, but kind of how he dealt with it. Ziggy took it to mean... He took indefinitely to mean permanently. It's not. Permanently insane is permanently insane. Indefinitely is indefinitely. It's 1d6 months, which is a definite amount. So it's kind of misnamed. But I explained all this in a post on our Facebook group, which I hope Ziggy read, but apparently he didn't. So he figured his character was permanently insane. And so his actions following this, I think, were not really how they should have been. But I'm never going to really stop a character and say that's not how you would act. You're not that crazy. Unless, I guess, if it's really extreme. But indefinitely insane means for 1d6 months, I basically get to fuck with you. You have hallucinations. You may have some severe phobias suddenly. Certain things might, spark an extreme reaction out of you. But you're certainly still in control of your character. I'm not going to take that away. In the book it says, indefinite insanity may remove a character from play for some time. But this is not a rule book. This is a guidebook. I'm not going to remove somebody for indefinite insanity. I don't think that's very fun. Because at some point, they're all going to go indefinite insane. And I prefer to have them go out in a bout of craziness rather than just, oh yeah, you're catatonic, you have to go to an asylum and you can play again in 4 months. Like, lame. Play it out. But I think Ziggy took it a little bit too far, as you'll see. So anyways, they started fighting the zombies then. And shots were fired. Alfred Hemsworth III fired off his elephant gun a good number of times. And there were listening checks this time to go deaf. But after a couple shots, pretty much everybody was just, you're temporary deaf. You can't hear a damn thing. I had forgotten about that in our little offshoot session. Thanks to Linus for reminding me about that shit. So yeah, they're all pretty much temporary deaf. And so they're shooting the zombies. Mifune busts out his camera and starts filming. Charlie Chalk runs to the pulley, the winch thing, which you need 2 people to succeed. And they have to be 2 strong people. This is a real heavy thing. Like, if all 4 of them did it, I'd be like, alright, yeah, you got it. But just one guy, no, you have to have you'd have to have supernatural strength. And I'm not just making that up, that's from the campaign. That's just how heavy it is. Like, it is a giant, pure stone block. It's damn heavy. And the professor pretty much just, like, runs to the door and just kind of stays there. And I could have said, you faint, or you scream and start running, or something like that. But it also says, if no obvious diagnosis for indefinite insanity is apparent, the keeper might mull over the choice until the end of the session, or until the beginning of the next session. Meanwhile, play can continue. For the moment, the character is haunted by a powerful sense of foreboding. So, it's basically, yeah, I get to kind of wait and see if I want. There may be, of course, times when I'm like, yeah, this is what happens, it's immediate, boom, there it is. Which is much more common for temporary insanity. It's much more likely to be an immediate effect. Indefinite insanity, I prefer the kind of long, drawn-out hallucinations, paranoia thing. I think that's more cool. So anyways, yes. And so they cannot, eventually the professor runs over to try and help Charlie Chalk with the winch. They cannot pull it up. They can't do it. And, because they figured they can just throw the zombies down whatever is in that pit, I guess. Whatever the stone block is covering. And, meanwhile, Alfred continues firing off shots. He pulls out a big axe. He pulls like a lumberjack axe out, and he tries swinging, but he has no skill in axe, so it's kind of difficult to hit. Especially when you remember that this is all in pretty much a completely dark room. And you may be wondering, how is Mifune filming in a completely dark room? We don't really care about details like that. It's Mifune, you know. I'm going to let him have his little joy before he's horribly mutilated and massacred. Eventually, they're pretty much overrun. Mostly because none of them really put up much of a fight. Really, the only one that did anything combat-wise was Alfred. And really, even if they had punched him, well, I guess if they all... Well, punching would be better than guns. I guess. Let's put it that way. Anyways, which is weird, but yeah. Eventually, they got overrun, and so the professor, Alfred, Charlie, and Neil, they all got in the doorway. They all got back into the hallway. Mifune was too busy filming, and he got kind of backed into a corner. And so Neil, like, ran out past the zombies, getting bitten a couple times, to try and rescue Mifune. But I don't know if they all imagined it like how I imagined it. But how I imagined it was like, this is going to be really tough for me to do with my fingers here. Like, they're all here. This is the doorway. The group of zombies is like right here, okay? Mifune is over here, okay? So Neil like ran this way to go like around them, so he could wrap all the way around to get Mifune, or distract the zombies this way. So he goes like this way. Mifune over here, he just bolts this way, runs past the zombies and get in. So now the four. I'm missing a whole bunch of details. I'll get to it in a second. The 5 of them are in the hallway, and now Neil is over here. And then Simon was like, oh, I lunge forward and I grab Neil and pull him in. And he, like, critically succeeded or something like that, so I allowed it. And they all slammed the door shut and they were all safe. Okay. And since I missed a couple details there, and you're like, what happened to Simon and Neil upstairs with the cop? Yeah, they saw a cop get out of the car and start heading down the alley, and so they stashed their guns under the counter of the Juju house, and then they just went down the trap door. But they left the trap door open, because they're hearing gunshots down there and shit, and probably screams. So they're just like, you know, we're gonna get down there to avoid the cop, but if the cop comes in and searches around, I'd rather he come down to try and help us. You know, I think that was their reasoning. So they go down, they see the shit that's going on there, they do their sanity rolls for seeing the zombies, and then, you know, what I just told you happened. Okay, so they're all in the hallway, door is shut. And this was when... Yeah, this was my first hallucination for the professor. I said that the professor sees one of the zombies morphing through the door into the hallway. And so the professor grabs a rifle out of George Mifume's hands. And he just suddenly, like, lifts it up and he fires it right at the zombie coming through the door. And he, like, critically succeeds. He rolled, like, a 3 or something. Like, amazing. He has no skill in it. But he, like, crits. And so I'm laughing my ass off. Because, you know, we all know that it's not really happening. Because the others don't see anything. And so the bullet perfectly ricochets off of the door. And I had them all roll luck to see who it hit. And it wasn't so much a luck roll as a D100 roll, but I just disguised it as a luck roll. I basically took whoever rolled the highest, which, of course, was the professor. So the bullet perfectly ricocheted straight forward and, like, straight back and hit him right in the arm for, like, 4 damage. And so he's just like, ah! And so they all see this professor grab a rifle, shoot at the door, which ricochets back and hits himself. Oh god. So Alfred like grabs the rifle out of his hands as blood is streaming down, and they're just like, you know, this guy's losing it. He's losing his hold on reality. And so their temporary deafness goes away, and so they're informed that a cop is upstairs. And at this point, they don't give a shit. Well, some of them don't give a shit. You know, they're like, I'd rather be up there with the cop than down here with the zombies. And this crazy guy. So Charlie heads right upstairs, followed by Neil and Mifune. And so Charlie is greeted at the top by a cop. He's got a flashlight and a revolver trained on him. He's like, come out of there slowly, put your hands in the air. And then he sees the other two and he says the same thing to them. And so they're all standing up there. He's got the gun on him. And he's like, I'm taking you boys into the station for questioning. And they all comply after much deliberation. Because, and even then, as they're walking out handcuffed, I guess, I don't know if I told them or something, like they found out it was only one guy. I guess they thought it was multiple cops. It was only one guy. And so they're like, oh, what? Like, if they knew, they would have tried something right away, which is just terrible. I can't even fucking imagine. If they had jumped this cop, oh my god. I don't know how you salvage shit like that. They would have had to flee the country. They would have had to flee the freaking country. Alright, so they all get arrested. They get put in the cop car. What follows is a very lengthy sequence. Because Anthony, Simon, and Alfred are still downstairs. And so they're kind of deliberating about what to do now. Because they heard that their friends were just arrested. And they were not ratted out. So they just, you know, yeah. They got off, you know, away from the law. And I guess since the cop's gone, now they can get out of there. And as they're debating, I have them all roll listen. The professor rolls a 100. He critically fails. It's amazing how many crits and critical fails there are when the chance seems so much slimmer than D&D. But, yeah. So he critically fails, and I think Simon succeeds. And so I'm like, Simon, you hear footsteps upstairs. Skinner, you hear whispers coming from the ceremonial chamber. And so I think Skinner's like, we gotta go back in there. We have to feed my friend. Or my friend's in there. You know, Roy. And they're like, what are you... There's people upstairs. And then the professor's like, oh, well, let's go meet them. And so he starts climbing the ladder. And I'm like, alright. And so they get to the top. He opens the trap door. And he narrowly avoids being hit by a machete. Which is actually... I don't know if I mentioned this in episode 1. That was like a month ago. It's not actually a machete. That's just what I use to help them understand. It's a pranga. And if any of them were actually knowledgeable... Actually, Alfred should be. But I don't think he didn't get to see it. Actually, he did get to see it a little later. Minor detail. It's a pranga. It's an African weapon. Anyways, so he narrowly dodges a couple of slashes from this pranga, from this guy dressed exactly like one of the winos was. And so eventually the professor like lunges forward, grabs the guy by the collar, and pulls him in. And he plummets down the trap door, smashing his face on the ground. Solo XP. He then tries the same trick with the other guy, until the other guy wisens up and grabs a spear off of the wall, which is a much better weapon. And so at that point, the professor slides down the ladder. And so they're all back at the bottom. The trapdoor slams shut, and they hear scraping noises from up above. And so they try going back up the ladder a little bit later, and they push up against the trapdoor, but it doesn't budge. And they try and shove it, but not happening. And so... oh boy. Okay. So what followed was more debating, I think. Because they're basically between a rock and a hard place, literally here. You know, something is blocking their way out, and the other way is filled with murderous zombies. I really screwed them, and I loved it. That was brilliant. That was basically my plan as soon as they said they were going to the Juju house. Accomplished. Except half of them are arrested. Even better. Okay, so I think Alfred tries going up there. He tries shoving up against it. It doesn't work. So he goes back down. He, like, fires a shot off from his elephant gun to try and, like, make the trapdoor collapse. It doesn't quite work, but he does punch a big hole through it. Meanwhile, the professor and Simon are, like, arguing with each other that they need to go in there and feed his friend. That's the only way, you know, it's got to be done. And so Simon is, like, worried that the guy that they just killed, the cultist, is going to rise up as a zombie when they're, like, trapped in there, which would really suck. I'll admit, I was tempted. But Simon quickly took the pranga and very unwieldily dismembered the cultist. Like, cut off his hands and his head. He took a sanity loss for that shit. He didn't even get to roll. Like, you can do automatic sanity losses if you feel like it. And I was like, yeah, that's fucked up, man. And, so I'm like, oh my god. So eventually they go listen at the door again. They don't hear anything. And so they open it up. They don't see the zombies right away. Or I think the professor, like, yanks it open before Simon's trying to close it, but the professor overpowers him and opens up the door. There's no zombies right there. And so here's where the professor made a really dumb move. He rushed in. He wants to get to the alcove where the zombies were. Because he feels like all his answers will be, you know, all his questions will be answered if he gets to behind that alcove. And so Simon yells as the professor runs out there that, knock twice and I'll let you in. And he slams the door shut. And I'm like, holy fuck. He just, like, murdered you. And so I'm like, okay, Skinner, do you have a light? And he's like, ugh, no. And I'm like, oh my god. And I'm like, alright, roll a spot hidden. He fails. And I'm like, oh god. Like, I don't show favoritism or anything. And if it were any of them, I would give them chances like this. But I just feel bad. Like, I'm trying not to immediately just kill him off, but every step or everything he fails at, I'm just like, what do you want me to do? And so finally he's like 3 feet away from the like running into all 5 zombies when I'm like, yeah, you see them right in front of you. They're turning to look at you. And so then he messages me a few things on Facebook about what he's about to do. And I'm like, okay. He doesn't really say the result of what he's hoping to happen, but he tells me what he does. And so he, like, runs back, or he walks back to the door. The zombies are following him. He, like, puts his back right next to the door. And when the zombies are, like, 5 feet away, he knocks twice on the door. Simon opens it up just a little bit. And he, like, tries to grab Skinner and pull him in. But Skinner, like, goes, like, halfway into the door and stops. And I'm like, I don't know what the hell Ziggy is doing. Like, you're about to die. I cannot stop that, man. Unless you go in right now and close the door, there's very little chance you survive. And so Simon sees that he's resisting coming in. The zombies are like a foot away. And they're going to, like, open the door all the way and they're going to crowd in. And they're trapped. So Simon does the only thing that he can do. He busts out his revolver and shoots Professor Anthony Skinner right in the head. And he critically succeeds. And, yeah. No, he rolls a 1. I'm serious. And so I offered him a dodge roll, just as a last-ditch thing that maybe you can, like, dodge roll back into the room and do something. But, no. Dead professor. And so his body, like, slumps down right in the doorway. Simon tries to pull it in, but he's not strong enough. And so the zombies get their hands on the door and they're like wrench it open. And so at that point, Simon just rushes over to the ladder. Meanwhile, Alfred is seeing this all going on. So he takes his gun out again. He tries, like, they gotta get out this way. So he tries his elephant gun again on the trap door. He rolls a 1. So that was 2 1s in a row. That's like a 1 in 1,000 chance or something like that. So that was crazy. So I'm like, yeah, you make the perfect shot. Better than you ever thought possible. And the object that was on top of the trapdoor collapses inward and plummets to the ground. And Alfred couldn't quite get his dodge roll down, so he did get clipped by the object, which was a big metal statue. And so after that, they clamber up the ladder, and they run out of the Juju house. Alfred, like, yells at Simon as, what the hell did you just do back there? Simon explains himself, and Ziggy's messaging me on Facebook. He's like, well, you know, like, I would agree with Simon if I were alive. Like, he had no choice. This isn't his fault. And so at that point, I'm like, okay, so, you know, if Ziggy's telling me this, clearly he only did that because he was acting insane. And I think I eventually talked to the whole group about that. I'm like, you know, indefinitely insane doesn't mean you have to act insane. It's a role play thing, you know, and some people get really into role play where they'll mention any like little twitches that their character does or anything like that. Some of them are not huge into role play, and so it has to be something kind of major that they really work off of. And so the concept of insanity is like the central part of Call of Cthulhu, but it's also perhaps the most confusing part as to how far do you really take it, you know. And so the book mentions this a little bit, not extensively, but it's like, you know, just because you lose a bunch of sanity, that doesn't mean you're forced to just what can I do to really just. What would an insane person do? Like, I'm not asking you to think about what would an insane person do, because that's such a weird, you know, it's insanity, it's weird, you know, you don't really understand it, that's the whole point. Here's what it exactly says. If an investigator has even 1 point of sanity remaining, the player has firm control. That's kind of what I'm saying. Because that's not fair, then. Like, if I say, okay, 2 people, you're indefinitely insane, and one person acts like how Ziggy acted, just doing really random things that threaten his own, that basically abandon self-preservation. Whereas one person just kind of, you know, I give him the hallucinations and he does a lot of twitches, but he's still in firm control of his actions. And when players are discussing a plan, he's right there with them, you know, okay, we should do this and this. You know, is that really fair, you know? Should I say to the one guy, you know, you need to be more insane? Or should I say to Ziggy, you need to be less insane? You know, it's a strange concept. But, here, near insanity calls for stronger role-playing, not for less player control. It is not good role-playing to murmur, my guy's sanity points are low. Such a statement is dull and makes nothing happen, but a player who can vividly describe his investigator's anxiety or terror and relate how that affects the game deserve applause. So, yes, I would say Ziggy did it wrong. In the end, it doesn't really make a huge difference, as I think his character would be probably pretty close to retirement from investigating at that point. But yes, I think I do agree that as long as you have any sanity, you're in firm control of your actions. You know, you can do whatever you want to do. But, like it says, role play, you know, I'm going to give you hallucinations, I'm going to give you paranoid thoughts, I'm going to give you phobias and things like that. And, you know, for stuff like temporary insanity, yeah, I'm going to do stuff like maybe you faint, maybe you scream, maybe you run away, things like that. But in the long run, as long as you have any sanity, you are in control of your character. I'm not going to take that away from you. And so, yeah, I guess if Ziggy didn't want to play anymore as that character, sure, he did the right thing, but I wanted to set kind of the ground rules for how I'm going to treat insanity. And, you know, that's pretty much it. You know, you're in control of your character however you want it to be, but you don't have to just throw your character's life away. I think self-preservation is still a thing. Anyways. Okay, so Simon explains himself. Alfred doesn't really, you know, he doesn't shoot the guy. He does pull a gun on him, but he doesn't shoot him. And so he eventually just, like shakes his head, and he grabs some shit out of the car, and he walks off. Simon, he doesn't steal Charlie Chalk's car, but he takes it. And he drives to the police station. Alfred drives to the professor's house, and there he finds a stack of books, and inside each one says, owned by Jonah Kensington, Prospero House, blah, 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 New York, blah, blah, blah. And so he looks up Jonah Kensington in a phone book. There were some roles involved in all this, and you know, I think he said he looks around for anything, like any clues or anything, evidence of note of anything. And so I could have given him a few different things, but I didn't mention the books specifically because I didn't mention the books, did I? Yeah, when Anthony met with Jonah Kensington, you know, Jonah said that Prospero House published all of Jackson Elias's books, and so Anthony asked Jonah. There's a lot of names. I hope people can keep up with all the names. You know, I have all my notes and I read all this stuff and I play the sessions, so I don't know how confusing it is for you guys, but hopefully you can keep up. Anthony asked Jonah Kensington if he had any copies, extra copies of Jackson Elias's books laying around. And so Jonah had, of course, all of them. And so he lended a bunch to Anthony. And they're all pretty much books on cults and occult nature and stuff like that. And, okay. So that's what Alfred found at Anthony's house. And so he calls up Prospero House, talks to the secretary. Jonah is not in. He left for the day. But he left a message for him saying that he's an acquaintance of Anthony Skinner. Professor Anthony Skinner, and give me a call back. Okay. All right. So back to our convicts. Neil, George Mifume, and Charlie Chalk. They're in. Okay. It was a very funny sequence. I guess we have a running joke now. I guess that's what you'd call it, where, when in doubt in any situation, make sure to bite the neck of anybody that's in your way. And so there was a lot of debate, and I never was sure how serious any of it was, on whether or not they should bite the detective to get out of there. They never did, because that would have been a terrible idea since they were all handcuffed. But they thought about it a lot. And on their way to the police station, they're in the back seat. Neil tries to ask for medical attention because he's at like 2 health, which quite honestly should mean you're unconscious. And I'm going to enforce that rule from now on. I didn't tell them I had forgotten, but that would mean that he was unconscious. 2 health and under is unconscious. So from now on, I'm going to enforce that. But for now, I wasn't going to retcon that right now. That would be a nightmare. And so he asked for, I need medical attention. And he failed his persuade, so this cop wasn't having any of it, so. Just, nope. Shut up back there, convict. And they all tried their persuades, and none of it worked. And so they get to the police station, they're thrown in the holding cell, and they're called in one by one for interrogation. And they spilled the complete and utter beans. They say everything. Everything they knew about the case, they talked about it. So they talked about the zombies, they talked about Jackson Elias, they talked about, the Juju house, the cult, all that kind of stuff. And I was like, wow, they're actually being smart again. Although, I shouldn't really say that, because I do need them to be on their toes constantly. They never really know who to trust. I guess they were just hedging their bets. But this cop could have easily been a cultist. And so, yeah, he wasn't. I'll tell you that. He wasn't. This was Lieutenant Martin Poole. He's kind of the head of the case. And so, he's not a cultist, but that was risky of them. And so, if you recall, Lieutenant Martin Poole had just met with the professor. And so, Lieutenant Poole knows more than he's letting on, of course. And he's been on this case for a while. There's been a lot of cult murders. He suspected the Juju house. He suspected a couple of other places of being involved with his cult. He doesn't really have anything solid to go on. And now this is a fucking breakthrough, man. He just found 3 people crawling out of the basement of the Juju house. And so they tell him everything. And he doesn't know what... Obviously, he doesn't believe the zombies right away. They tell him about the zombies, and they're like, oh, well, okay, zombies. Or animated dead. I'll just substitute every time they say zombies for animated dead. And he's not going to believe that shit, He's a hard-nosed cop in New York. There ain't no animated dead walking around. But he does know about cult murders, That's a real thing. People getting massacred with machetes and shit. And so, he doesn't completely believe their story entirely. It's definitely food for thought. But they were in a very unfortunate predicament. And, so after, he calls in Charlie first. Charlie tells his whole story, everything. And after he's done talking to Charlie, he goes outside the interrogation room and he comes back like 5 minutes later. And he talks to all 3 of them, and he sends some squad cars over to the Juju house to check it out. Check out the basement, because he didn't have a chance. He was on his own. So, they check out the basement. And so the night passes. And Simon... Simon waits in Charlie's car outside of the police station, like across the street. He gets some Chinese food, but other than that, he just sits in the car. And he doesn't go to sleep. He doesn't fall asleep. He's like, I'm too shook, I can't, I don't want to fall asleep. I won't do it. And for the first night, I'm not going to make him roll anything. Because I'll accept he's rather frazzled. I'll allow him to stay up one night. But subsequent nights, there's going to be some constitution rolls. And also, sleep deprivation is a definitely big thing. That's going to affect your shit. Maybe not the first couple days too bad, but after that, yeah. I hear about people that stay awake for that long. They start to get hallucinations. And, I love hallucinations, so, yeah. Go ahead with that, Simon. I encourage it. Okay, so the next morning, Neil, Mafume, and Charlie, they're all called into the interrogation room. All three of them. And Lieutenant is there. He's like scratching his chin. He's like, alright. I had my boys check out the juju house. And so basically, they went in there, they went down the ladder. They found this dismembered corpse, which was like, you know. Then they found like a mostly devoured corpse, which was like, and they're waiting on forensic dental records and shit like that, but they're pretty sure it's the body of Professor Anthony Skinner. And so the three guys are like, oh, fuck. Like, no. That was like their main connection, was the professor. And they went inside the big room, and they found something that they'd rather not speak about. And so Charlie's like, it matches up with what we said, right? He's like, yeah, it does. And so this was basically, what followed was basically me salvaging my campaign a little bit. Just a little bit. In the real world, they'd probably be locked up for a while, but I don't want to be that. I don't want to be that rough. And so I made Lieutenant Martin Poole much more sympathetic than perhaps he really would be. He basically leveled with them and said that he's been on this case for months, and this is the first real breakthrough he's had. And he doesn't believe that they're involved with the cult shit and that they just kind of perhaps stumbled upon this. But he does have multiple men dead and other, more men missing that are involved in all this. He's not quite sure what to make of it. And he's tempted to let them go, because they did uncover something very quickly that he couldn't with months of legal work. And so he's kind of bending the system a little bit, because he wants to get to the bottom of this. If he figures out who's behind all this, that makes his career, man. And so, obviously, if it came down to it, he'd probably take sole credit for the discovery, or the apprehension of whoever the leader is. But he's willing to let maybe this slide if it gets him that. And so, of course, I had them all roll Persuade. And Charlie rolled very well. I think he rolled like a 5 or 6 or something like that. And so he's like, all right, I'm going to let you boys go. But you're basically on probation. Every single thing you find out, you're going to report to me. And you do have the police department's support, but only minorly, basically, If they come with some huge, undeniable evidence, maybe they'll put together like a police raid. But other than that, they basically have the lieutenant's support. And so he uncuffs them, and he's like, don't make me regret this. And I'm like, don't make me regret this. And so, they're very, thankful, and like, we'll get to the bottom of this for sure. And so they Neil rolls a luck. He rolls like a 5. He gets his shotgun back that they found at the Juju house. And so Lieutenant Poole bypasses some paperwork and gets that out for him. And they found... Okay, they confiscated Mafume's camera when he was brought in. And on the camera is, of course, this footage of these zombies. And the lieutenant went over it. He watched the footage. He took his sanity loss. Although he's a pretty sturdy guy. And he's like, yeah, I watched the footage, but I'm tempted to burn that. I don't think that's something public eye should see. And so Charlie's like, I don't blame you. But Mafume's like, no, man, you can't do that. That's my life's work. No, he basically passed off the entire time that it was Charlie's camera and Charlie was filming, because when he came in, when he came in, Mifune was like, watch the camera. There's, you got to see the footage on there. And so the cop was like, it was probably some other cop, some beat cop. He was like holding the camera and he's like, all right, Negro, who did you steal this from? He's like, it's not mine, it's Charlie's. Oh God, Mifune. Okay, so he rolls a persuade and he gets the camera and the footage back. So he can make his zombie movie. Oh God. And I had the cops there, like he's like, if I see this footage, you know, in the theater or something like that, I'll know exactly who released it. George Mifune. Okay. And so they get out of there. Oh, one other detail. They asked about the zombies. You know, how did you deal with them? And the lieutenant's just like, we burned the entire basement. And they're just like, everything? There's nothing left? Nothing. Abominations, you know? No, I don't fucking blame him. Actually, why would I blame him? I did that. That was my choice. It was partly a realistic choice, because I feel like they probably fired their guns a bunch of times, but they saw it didn't do much. So they torched that whole fucking place, which did kill the zombies. It was secondly a slightly metagame thing, where personally I didn't want them to go back to the Juju house again. I didn't want a third session of them dealing with shit at the Juju house. And so I have plans of what will happen, but you'll have to wait for Secrets of Roll Mangging for that. So yes, it was burned. And, you know, the upstairs will probably be just condemned and cleared out and stuff like that. Okay, so they go out. They see Simon sitting in the car. And so they go over there. They all chat. Simon fills them in and eventually reveals that he murdered Professor Anthony Skinner. And they're just like, what the... And so, yeah, they're not entirely happy with Simon, but yeah, okay. And so they want to get hotel rooms now. So they book hotel rooms at the Algonquin Hotel. Okay. Meanwhile, Alfred gets a call back from Jonah Kensington. And again, it was like the exact same conversation. They're just like, well, we need to speak in person. And he's like, all right, come to the Prospero house. And so Alfred goes down there, talks to the secretary, goes upstairs, sits down, and they begin speaking. And so Alfred reveals that the professor is dead. And Jonah's just like, damn! Because that's like, you know, I feel like that may be a trend now. He speaks with Roy. The next day, Anthony comes in, tells him Roy is dead. The next day, Alfred comes in, tells him Anthony is dead. Who's going to come in and tell him that Alfred is dead? Oh, I hope not. That would be terrible. Poor Jonah. Okay. And so at some point during the conversation, I think, okay, no, they started talking about Jackson and the Carlisle expedition again. And Alfred says that he was in Africa when all that went down. And so then Jonah was like, Africa? And you said your name was Alfred Hemsworth? He's like, yes, Alfred Hemsworth III. And Jonah's like, I knew I've heard of you, the famous big game hunter, right? And he's like, oh, I didn't know I was that famous. And I'm like, oh, of course, the real life Alan Quartermain? Which I think is a joke that Brits would probably get more than Americans, but yeah. And so that Jonah is definitely all for helping the famous Alfred Hemsworth III. And so they talked about a number of different things. A lot of it was kind of repeat of the same stuff that Jonah told Anthony. But he also mentioned the notes that he received from Jackson, from Nairobi and London. But this time, since I didn't think either of them were going to press him for it, maybe Alfred said something. I don't know. But Jonah did say, I do have the notes here if you would like to look over them. They do paint a rather erratic picture of my friend, but if they're of any use, I think it'd be worth it. And so he went and he got the big stack of notes to give to Alfred. And these notes are a pretty damn key item of the campaign. And this is like, I don't want to spoil too much, but the campaign is much more about the Carlisle expedition than the Juju house. And so I think they're finally maybe about to realize that, or at least Alfred is. I think he's got that at this point. He's understood it. So Jonah offers his full support. Anything they need. He offers to set up a meeting with Erica Carlisle. She's a bit standoffish, I guess. She's a bit hard to get a hold of, but Jonah's got some clout left in New York, so maybe he can get a meeting arranged if they're real, gentleman-like. But hey, if he mentions that Alfred Hemsworth III is involved, that might do it. And of course, he gives Alfred the notes. And so, as a completely metagame thing, and I told them this as a metagame thing, Jonah, I was like, you guys pretty much have realized at this point you're going to be traveling outside of the country soon enough. I don't think that's a secret anymore. I've dropped enough hints. And so, Jonah basically acts as the RPG version of a save point. Because it's very possible. Actually, it's already done, isn't it? Yeah. Nobody left from the original 5. Nobody's left from the original 5. So the people that started this campaign are already no longer with us after the second session. So, yeah, exactly. So we're going to have people down the line, in Nairobi, they have never fucking heard of Jackson Elias. And so, for me to keep somehow coming up with contrived ways for them to keep this investigation going, it's kind of difficult. And so, Jonah kind of acts as like a beacon. And so, wherever they are, however ridiculous it is, they're going to, well, I guess if they're in the middle of the desert, I can't do that. But as long as they're in some kind of civilized area, they're going to wire all their notes and all their information about everything that they did up to the minute back to Jonah Kensington. And I'm not going to worry about money or complications or really any shit like that, because this is to save me a huge headache. So just in case, if they're in Shanghai or Ireland or God knows where, and they all die, total party killed, completely dead, my campaign isn't boned, I can still somehow have Jonah get some new help. He hasn't heard from these people in weeks, and so he's got to send somebody out there that he knows. It's perhaps kind of lame, but I think it's better that way than to just give up on the campaign if they all die. Maybe they all want to give up on it if they all die, but just in case some of them want to keep going, I have that. So it's basically a save point. And it's completely metagame, but whatever. Okay. So then Alfred, he heads out. He goes to the Roosevelt Hotel, and he books a room under the name Raymond, because he doesn't want to give his real name. Smart thinking. I like that. And that's pretty much where we ended for this session. Yeah. Holy shit. There was a moment there. There was a moment when the three of them were arrested. Anthony was dead. And the other two were basically trapped down there. Or they were just getting out. And at that moment I was like, how in God's name do I salvage this shit? Because Anthony was their only link. how do I get any of the rest of these people a hold, how do they get a hold of Jonah? Jonah is pretty central to this shit. And I guess it could have gone on, but I really have to thank Ren for being smart here. He went back, maybe he was metagaming, I don't know, but I thank him for it regardless. That was good metagaming at the very least. He went back to Anthony's house, he got Jonah's name, and he got a hold of him. That really saved my ass. And the fact that the other three got loose was also a little metagaming, because I didn't want to just screw their characters over that quickly. But in the future, down the line, if these guys are still alive and they get arrested, that may be the end of them for a while, unless they get broke out of prison. But, yeah. So, yeah, it was kind of a crazy session. And, like I said, they didn't really find out anything new. Alfred definitely found out a lot more than he came in with. He's on a good lead. The other three found out from the lieutenant that the only other really place of note that he looked into as part of the case was a place called Fat Mabel's, which they didn't really ask about, and he didn't give any details. So they don't really know what they're walking into, but yeah. So they're interested in Fat Mabel's. Alfred is interested in perhaps Erica Carlisle, the Carlisle expedition. I don't know what Simon is interested in. And then we have Ziggy's new character, which isn't fully fleshed out. I believe he's playing the Native American caretaker of Anthony Skinner's house. And so I'm going to have to kind of work on how to introduce him to the other characters, but he's going to be an interesting guy. So, yeah. So this role manging now is pretty much where I go through the events of the session, and then I am hoping that anybody really interested in this is also watching Secrets of Role Manging, where I go through all the nitty-gritty stuff, and I can talk about what's about to happen to them. Unless you're part of the campaign, in which case stay the hell away, or I'll hate you. So yeah, but definitely stay tuned for Secrets of Role Manging, because boy oh boy, are they in a shitload of trouble. Well, we'll see. We'll see what they do. But yeah, it's crazy shit. Alright, so yeah, that was a lot of fun, that's for sure. And we're going to be coming back next week with most of the same characters. That's good, I like that. So, the adventure will continue. Alright, my name is Mang. This has been Role Manging for Call of Cthulhu. And I'll see you fine folks next week.